Look at a map of the world today, and you'll see Russia, the largest country on Earth. But less than 4 decades ago, those borders stretched even further. From 1922 to 1991, 1/6 of the Earth's landmass, spanning 11 time zones and encompassing over 290 million people, belonged to a single, monolithic superpower, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The Soviet Union wasn't just a country, it was an unprecedented human experiment. It was a radical attempt to rip up the blueprint of human history and build an entirely new kind of society from the ground up. And for a time, it seemed like it was working. This empire, born from the blood and chaos of a workers' revolt, transformed from an agrarian peasant state into an industrial titan in the blink of an eye. They crushed the Nazi war machine. They built weapons that could end the world. They even beat the United States to space. For nearly half a century, the globe was split in two by the Cold War, balancing on a knife edge between Washington and Moscow. Yet, despite its monumental military power and its iron grip on Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union simply ceased to exist. In 1991, it collapsed not from outside invasion, but from within. So, how did it happen? How did a utopian dream turn into a totalitarian nightmare? And how did an empire capable of putting the first man among the stars fall apart in just 70 years? This is the rise and fall of the USSR. To understand the Soviet Union, we have to look at the absolute misery of the Russian Empire in 1917. For 3 centuries, the Romanov dynasty ruled with absolute power. But by the 20th century, Russia was a ticking time bomb, deeply impoverished, unindustrialized, and pushed past its breaking point by World War I. Millions of ill-equipped soldiers were slaughtered on the front lines while families starved at home. In February 1917, food riots exploded into a full-scale revolution. The Tsar was forced to step down. The monarchy was dead. But the temporary government made a fatal mistake. They kept Russia in the war. That opened the door for a radical Marxist exile named Vladimir Lenin. Returning from banishment, Lenin offered a simple, intoxicating promise to the exhausted public: peace, land, and bread. He led the Bolsheviks, a highly disciplined group of far-left revolutionaries. By October 1917, they launched a second decisive coup, seizing key strongholds in the capital and declaring the world's first communist state. But taking power was the easy part. Holding it triggered a savage civil war. It pitted Lenin's Reds against the Whites, a loose coalition of monarchists, capitalists, and foreign armies desperate to crush the communist movement. Under the military leadership of Leon Trotsky, the newly formed Red Army used ruthless tactics, known as the Red Terror, to execute political enemies and enforce absolute control over the economy. By 1922, the Reds had won, but the country was in ruins. To unify the fractured, multi-ethnic territory, the Bolsheviks officially established a new federation, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Lenin had forged his state, but he wouldn't live to see its future. In 1924, he passed away, leaving a fragile empire and a terrifying power vacuum. Following Lenin's death, most expected the brilliant intellectual Leon Trotsky to take the reins. Instead, they were outmaneuvered by a master bureaucrat operating from the shadows. Joseph Stalin, a man whose chosen name literally meant man of steel. Stalin quietly built a network of loyalists, systematically expelled his rivals from the party, and eventually had Trotsky exiled and assassinated. By the late 1920s, Stalin had established absolute, undisputed control over the state. Stalin looked at the Western capitalist world and saw an existential threat. He famously declared that the USSR was 50 to 100 years behind the advanced countries, and that they must make up this distance in 10 years, or be crushed. His solution? The 5-year plans. He forced rapid, overnight industrialization. To feed the new city factories, he launched collectivization, forcing millions of peasants off their private land onto state-run megafarms. The disruption was catastrophic. In Ukraine, this policy caused a catastrophic man-made famine known as the Holodomor, where millions starved to death while the state continued to export grain abroad to fund its factories. As the 1930s progressed, Stalin's paranoia deepened. Paralyzed by the fear of internal coups, he unleashed the Great Purge. Anyone suspected of disloyalty, from high-ranking military generals and party elites to ordinary teachers and factory workers, was arrested. Millions were executed or thrown into the gulag, a vast network of brutal forced labor camps stretching across the frozen wilderness of Siberia. Fear became the primary currency of Soviet life. Then came the ultimate test of survival. In June 1941, Nazi Germany shattered their non-aggression pact and launched a massive surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. This became known to Soviets as the Great Patriotic War. The onslaught brought the USSR to the brink of total collapse, with German forces reaching the outskirts of Moscow. But at Stalingrad, in the bloodiest battle in human history, the Red Army held the line. Turning the tide through sheer, agonizing endurance, the Soviets began a massive counteroffensive, eventually marching all the way to Berlin and hoisting their flag over the Reichstag in May 1945. The victory was monumental, but the cost was staggering. Roughly 27 million Soviet citizens lost their lives. The USSR emerged from the ashes of World War II utterly devastated, yet radically transformed. It was no longer just an isolated communist experiment. It was an atomic armed global superpower, ready to face its next great rival. In March 1953, Joseph Stalin died, leaving behind an empire frozen in fear. The man who emerged from the power struggle to succeed him was Nikita Khrushchev. In 1956, Khrushchev shocked the communist world by delivering a secret speech behind closed doors, directly denouncing Stalin's crimes and cult of personality. This initiated a period known as the Khrushchev Thaw. Political prisoners were released from the gulag, censorship relaxed, and for a brief moment, the Soviet people breathed a sigh of relief as the state tried to shift away from pure terror. But a softer stance at home did not mean a retreat on the world stage. The Cold War was now in full swing. Europe was firmly divided by Churchill's metaphorical Iron Curtain. In 1961, the Soviets erected a literal barrier, the Berlin Wall. The geopolitical chess match between Moscow and Washington soon triggered proxy wars across the globe. The tension peaked in October 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 agonizing days after the U.S. discovered Soviet nuclear missiles stationed just 90 miles from Florida, the world stood on the absolute brink of total thermonuclear annihilation. Disaster was averted only by a last-minute, secret compromise. While the nuclear threat was terrifying, the rivalry also fueled humanity's greatest technological leap, the space race. For years, the Soviet Union dominated. In 1957, they stunned the West by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, into orbit. 4 years later, in April 1961, Soviet pilot Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. It was a glorious era of Soviet optimism, used as ultimate propaganda to argue that communism was scientifically superior to capitalism. But the triumphs couldn't hide growing domestic issues, including food shortages and erratic foreign policies. In 1964, tired of his unpredictable leadership, the Communist Party quietly ousted Khrushchev in a bloodless palace coup. The golden era of Soviet growth was over, and a long, quiet decay was about to begin. Following Khrushchev's ouster, leadership landed in the hands of Leonid Brezhnev. Brezhnev promised his people something they desperately craved after decades of terror, war, and unpredictable reforms: stability of cadres. For the average citizen, life became predictable and safe. But behind the scenes, this stability turned into rot. The government transformed into a gerontocracy, a system ruled entirely by old men who refused to change. As the years bled together, this calm period earned a darker name in history: the Era of Stagnation. On paper, the USSR was a titan. It possessed the world's largest military and thousands of nuclear warheads. But the top-down, state-planned economy was failing at basic logistics. While billions of rubles poured into defense, the civilian economy dried up. Basic consumer goods like toilet paper, fresh meat, winter coats, or a family car became agonizingly scarce. Citizens spent hours standing in lines just for basic groceries. A massive black market emerged, where the only way to survive or get quality items was through Blatta's system of personal favors and corruption. Seeking to assert its power abroad despite domestic rot, Moscow made a fatal miscalculation in December 1979. Soviet tanks rolled into Afghanistan to prop up a failing communist regime. What they expected to be a swift military intervention turned into a grueling 10-year quagmire. It became Soviet Vietnam. It drained billions of rubles from a dying economy, cost the lives of 15,000 Soviet soldiers, and completely shattered the myth of Red Army invincibility. When Brezhnev died in 1982, followed in rapid succession by two more elderly, ailing leaders, the Soviet Union was exhausted, bankrupt, and spiritually broken. In 1985, an energetic 54-year-old leader named Mikhail Gorbachev took power. He inherited a dying superpower and knew that if the Soviet Union was to survive, it had to evolve. Gorbachev introduced two revolutionary policies: perestroika, an economic restructuring to introduce small elements of free market capitalism, and glasnost, meaning openness, which granted citizens unprecedented freedom of speech and press. For the first time in Soviet history, people could openly criticize the government without fear of the gulag. But glasnost quickly exposed how broken the system really was. The ultimate turning point came in April 1986, when reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. The state's initial instinct was to cover it up, risking millions of lives to protect its reputation. When the truth finally leaked, Chernobyl shattered the public's remaining trust in the government. It proved that the Soviet regime was literally toxic, built on a foundation of lies and structural incompetence. Armed with their new freedom of speech, the Soviet people didn't just criticize the government, they demanded a way out. In 1989, communist regimes across Eastern Europe collapsed like dominoes, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall. Gorbachev refused to send in the Red Army to stop it. By 1990, individual Soviet republics, led by the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, began declaring their independence. In a desperate final attempt to save the old ways, communist hardliners launched a military coup in August 1991. Tanks rolled into Moscow, but ordinary citizens stood in their way, refusing to back down. The coup collapsed in just 3 days. The Soviet Union was clinically dead. On Christmas Day, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev sat before television cameras and resigned as president. That night, high above the Kremlin walls, the red Soviet hammer and sickle flag was lowered for the very last time, replaced by the tricolor flag of the Russian Federation. Without a single shot being fired, the mightiest communist empire in human history vanished from the map. The Soviet Union lasted just 69 years. In the grand timeline of world empires, it was a mere blink of an eye. Yet, more than 3 decades after its collapse, the shadow of the USSR still looms massively over our world today. Out of its ashes, 15 independent nations were born. From the borders of Eastern Europe to the steppes of Central Asia, these societies are still actively reshaping their identities, resolving old conflicts, and healing from the deep scars of their shared totalitarian past. The Soviet experiment proved that no amount of military might, secret police, or industrial output can permanently sustain an empire when its foundation cracks from within. The USSR is gone, but the history it wrote continues to define the world we live in today.